Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm the Darga Velazian. Coming up in today's newscast. New coronavirus cases reaching over 100 for the third day in a row. Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid announces first official visit to Rome to meet with the U.S. Secretary of State. And the latest on Iran, the attack on its nuclear facility, and the ongoing negotiations. For the first time since the end of the third wave of the coronavirus, an Israeli city, Binyamin Givat Ada, was declared a red area on Thursday morning. This according to the traffic light system, where cities are color-coded green, yellow, or red, depending on the number of coronavirus cases. Let's take a look. New coronavirus cases in Israel reaching over 100 for the third day in a row in a worrying surge of coronavirus cases. The health ministry announced that 138 people tested positive for COVID-19 on Wednesday, the highest rate since the end of the third wave, and with a total of 729 active cases throughout the country. Health and government officials are closely monitoring the spread of the Delta variant, also known as the Indian variant, which is said to be more contagious than the original strain, and seems to be a leading cause of new cases in Israel. In the largest hotspot, Binyamin Givat Ada, so far seeing 125 new coronavirus cases, with some 1,100 people in quarantine. The majority of the cases are school-aged children who are not vaccinated. The infection, most likely linked to the Delta variant, was introduced from a trip abroad and spread quickly within the school and beyond. Additionally, another city, Modi'in Maccabim Re'ut, was also marked yellow as new cases of coronavirus are also surging there. Following the heightened levels, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Interior Minister Ayelet Shaked spoke with Chaim Bibas, head of the Federation of Local Authorities in Israel, and agreed that the local authorities would take the lead in the efforts to cut off the chains of infection. As such, local authorities are set to reopen the epidemiological investigation systems and ramp up enforcement of quarantine and coronavirus procedures. Yet despite the new surge in cases, Israeli health officials are saying that this is not a new wave. Yet. This due to the fact that the majority of the population is vaccinated, and those who are infected have so far mostly gotten a mild form of the virus. In fact, Dr. Alon Rapaport, the medical director of Pfizer Israel, said in an interview with Ynet News on Thursday that the Pfizer vaccine does offer protection against the Delta variant. He said according to Pfizer's findings, the vaccine offers 90% protection against becoming infected and showing symptoms, and offers around 95% protection from severe disease. As such, health officials are projecting cautious optimism, but nonetheless have decided to instill new coronavirus regulations, mainly delaying the entry of tourists into Israel from July 1st to August 2021. This due to the fact that the new cases are mostly linked to the new variants coming in from abroad through Ben Gurion International Airport. Additionally, the health ministry is set to announce that Israelis will have to once again wear masks indoors, though many Israelis are already doing so voluntarily. Now, as the Delta variant of the coronavirus is sweeping across the world, Israel, despite its high vaccination rate, is also not immune. As the Prime Minister calls on Israelis to avoid traveling abroad and has shut down Israel's borders to tourists until August 1st. So, is Israel potentially on the verge of a fourth wave? Joining us now to discuss is Professor Nadav Davidovich from the Department of Health Systems Management from Ben Gurion University in the Negev. Welcome. So first things first, a bit about the Delta variant. Just how dangerous is it, and how big a threat to Israel and to, the corona-free lifestyle that Israelis have already gotten used to?
The Delta variant is a threat all throughout the world, mainly because it's much more infective. The pace of its spread is about 50% higher than previous variants. And those who are within the issue of COVID are maybe not so surprised. The fact that we have vaccine nationalism in so many countries with slow vaccination rates is a fertile ground for developing new variants. This is one of them. And we see now the Delta variant already in 80 countries, including within Israel. We are lucky that the Pfizer vaccine is quite efficient. So it's serving us as a very important factor, but vaccination are not enough because all vaccines, including Pfizer, are not 100%, and there's still people that are vaccinated can transfer the virus. And this would happen now in Israel. We have two localized outbreaks, one in Binyamina, one in Modi'in. People that came back from abroad, even if vaccinated, can transmit it, especially to young students at schools because they are not vaccinated. So what we need to do now first is to speed up vaccination. We have still 200,000 people above 50 high risk that should be vaccinated, and also children, because we have now the data that the vaccine is safe and efficient, but also to do all of the surveillance needed, comply with the regulations in terms of people returning from abroad.
So let's talk about that.
To use
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, about Ben Gurion International Airport and the travel restrictions, right? We've known the Delta variant is around and potentially dangerous for a while. So, why were we talking about reopening borders on July 1st, just a few days ago, only now to shut down Israel's borders?
Up until several days ago, the new cases, the numbers were almost zero. In the last 3-4 days, we have now about 100 cases per day, and we see the issue of the variant, and this is why we probably need to take some measures that are not going to spread the virus throughout the country. Again, this is still localized because of the high vaccination rates. Hospitals are not affected as they were during January. And probably the whole situation is part of the global situation that, unfortunately, it's a market failure that countries are not collaborating enough. There are some initiatives like COVAX that Israel participated, but I think it's a warning sign for future emergencies to arrive that we need to have global health governance.
And what about Israelis or those who are planning to travel to Israel from abroad? I mean, what advice would you give them?
You need to go to the Israeli website. There are instructions that are updated constantly. You need to do the test, PCR test, 72 hours before entering, but also to remember that the whole route before your flight, at the airport, wearing masks, during the flight, at the arrival, you need to protect yourself, and also when landing to take another test, and if coming from problematic countries, to comply with isolation. This was another problem. I'm so happy that all relevant ministries were sitting together, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Transportation, Aviation Authority, because you need to work and do an integrative approach. This was part of the problem, especially with the previous government. I also hope that we're going to solve the issue of vaccinating Palestinians, because it's also both a humanitarian but also an Israeli interest, because new variants can arrive also from there. And again, we need to have global health governance. It's not just Israel that need to take some measures, but in collaboration with other countries.
All right, Professor Nadav Davidovich, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez and Prime Minister Naftali Bennett dedicated the new embassy of Honduras in Jerusalem on Thursday. This is the fourth embassy to move to Jerusalem after the United States, Guatemala, and Kosovo, with other countries intending to follow suit. Israel also plans to open an embassy in Tegucigalpa. At the inauguration, Bennett welcomed Hernandez to the Eternal Capital and thanked him for the deep friendship and bond between the two states and for Honduras' consistent support in international institutions, even when it was not popular. Prior to the ceremony, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid and his counterpart, Foreign Minister Lisandro Rosales, signed memorandums of understanding on cooperation in agriculture, water, health, education, and innovation. Now, despite advice not to travel abroad because of COVID, in some cases the show must go on. Alternate Prime Minister and Acting Foreign Minister Yair Lapid announcing plans to fly to Rome next week to meet with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. This trip will mark Lapid's first official visit both as Foreign Minister and with members of the new Israeli and new U.S. administrations. Lapid and Blinken have spoken several times since the formation of the new coalition and have agreed to a no-surprises policy to maintain regular communication channels between the two countries. And in maintaining close relationships with Washington and with aims to improve ties to the Democratic Party specifically, Lapid also holding his first official phone call as foreign minister with U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. Pelosi tweeting about how pleased she was to speak with Lapid about the strong ties and shared values between Israel and the U.S., and Lapid thanking Pelosi for her long-standing support while also expressing the importance of bipartisan support for Israel in D.C. And this is not the only trip Lapid will be taking, as he confirmed plans for a trip to the United Arab Emirates as well, in the first public visit of a top Israeli official to the Gulf state. Then while there, Lapid is set to attend the inaugurations of both the Israeli embassy in Abu Dhabi and the Israeli Consulate General in Dubai. And all is part of the incredible ongoing efforts to advance close ties in the wake of the Abraham Accords. On Wednesday, an Iranian nuclear facility was hit in a mysterious attack, with limited details slowly emerging that the site was a nuclear centrifuge facility in Iran's Atomic Energy Organization. And the New York Times reporting that the site was on a list of potential targets given to the Trump administration by Israel. The attack happening on the backdrop of negotiations for the nuclear deal with Iran. So joining us via Zoom to discuss is Miki Alanson, international relations expert and former head of the Foreign Relations Directorate with the Israeli Prime Minister's National Security Council. Welcome. So first of all, what can you tell us about this attack? Right, we have limited information, but do we know how much damage was done or who was behind it?
No, there are still speculations. Nobody claimed responsibility. These attacks have been ongoing, as we know, and reasserting to the Iranians their vulnerability in some areas. I would say I don't think there's need to explain more. I'm sure in the coming days we will receive more details about this attack.
Now, all of this is happening on the backdrop of negotiations. So how does an attack like this, or you mentioned a series of attacks, how does this affect the negotiations, if at all, and what message is it supposed to convey to the Iranians? You mentioned to show their vulnerability.
Yes, well, it does convey them a message of vulnerability, and maybe makes them want to be more interested in promoting the negotiations. So far, they have been playing quite hard to get. They're not willing to negotiate with the Americans in the same room. They need a third party to mediate between them, and they have been very tough negotiators. They are extremely good negotiators, and I think these attacks are definitely an encouragement for them to sign the deal.
Now, we are hearing conflicting reports in the media surrounding the negotiations. So first of all, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. What is the status of negotiations at the moment?
Well, the Iranians just published today that the Americans agreed to remove all sanctions on their oil, on their insurance, I think, if not all, some of the insurance sector and others, and to remove some personalities from the sanctions list. The Americans did not confirm this, but we can assume to a large extent this is true because we see the Iranians preparing to restart their dealings in the oil market, and we see negotiations in OPEC preparing for the Iranians to come back to the market with all the effect that would have on countries like Saudi Arabia. So I would assume that the deal is progressing. Unfortunately, it was made clear to the Iranians that the interest in having them back on board is no less and maybe more than their need to be back on board. So I think we should assume and make our plans based on the assumption that JCPOA is back in the game.
But yet, on the other hand, we are hearing a report that the U.S. is halting negotiations to hear out the Israeli side, right? Yair Lapid is set to visit next week. There seems to be increased talk between the new administration and Jerusalem in Washington. So what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's extremely, extremely important. I don't know how much to stress that Israel would not remain the only factor in the Middle East that would interfere with American interest, and the American interest today is quiet. They are strategically very tired. They're not. They would like to withdraw from the Middle East as much as possible. Unfortunately, the Middle East does not let you leave. And we hear in the news that Saudi Arabia is negotiating with Iran through Iraq. And we know the U.S. would like to concentrate on other issues like China, like Russia, like post-COVID situation, infrastructure, internal issues. And they would really, I think the Americans would really like to have the Iranian nuclear issue off the table and to get to be done with it. So it is extremely important that Israeli Kochavi and Rivlin and Lapid would speak to the U.S. It's extremely important to have open discussion channels and to coordinate our plans. Our relations with the U.S. are so superior to almost anything else. We cannot afford to be a party that objects to their policy, but we can try and we should try to influence it.
All right, Mickey Allenson, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
Now, the new coalition was sworn in just 2 weeks ago and already facing some internal challenges, the most prominent surrounding the extension of a law that bars granting citizenship to Palestinians who marry Israeli citizens. Dubbed the Family Reunification Law, the coalition is deeply divided over the issue, which is set to go up for a vote in the Knesset next week, after a vote was already delayed since there was no majority to support it. The coalition also seeing challenges with regards to settlements, and here to discuss these issues and what this means for the newly formed government is ILTV's Asaf Nissan. So before we start, for our viewers who may not be familiar, can you tell us what the Family Reunification Law is and why it's so controversial?
So the Family Reunification Bill is a law that was established back in the day for non-Jewish citizens, mostly Palestinians or mostly Arab Israelis, or non-Jewish citizens who live in the state of Israel and are Jewish citizens and are citizens of the state. They have the option to prolong the citizenship and the visas of their spouses due to marriage laws and marriage privileges. But back then, until 2003, the law was fine, the law was clear, but since 2003, it was repealed. And the main reason, of course, was because there was a lot of discrepancies and a lot of misuse of the law, especially in the fields of terror.
I see. So what's the current situation within the coalition? I mean, who is opposing this extension and why?
So the current situation with the law is there's a lot of opposition, of course, from the Arab parties, including coalition party Ram, which, despite the fact and the deals that were given on the table, like Minister of Construction Zev Elkin, who actually optioned vice ministership to Mansour Abbas and potential favors to the party, they have decided still to recline it because they do dub it a very racist law. In addition, you can see Isawi Fridge from Meretz, another coalition party that also is resisting for the same reason, and they even dubbed set it on the table that if push comes to shove, he will give up his ministership for it.
So, I mean, why is this still so controversial? Ideally, it's being used for terrorist reasons. Why are they still opposing?
Because it wasn't always used for terror reasons. And of course, the issue on the table is what happens with humanitarian reasons. If you have a sick relative, if you have someone who's old, if you have someone who's married and stuck in Israeli jail, not necessarily for terror reasons, but let's say criminal reasons or non-dangerous reasons, of course, by itself, it poses the issue of what do you do? How do you deal with it? I mean, you can do anything for, as they said, as we all know, for the sake of security, there is the option at the table of saying, yeah, because this is a security issue and a security risk, we cannot allow this to continue. And this is why the law was on the table so many times.
Now, you mentioned the offer from Elkin and sort of giving up, ministerial positions. We're seeing a lot of attempts to reach a compromise. This is the first major challenge facing the coalition. Does it have the potential to break it already? I mean, is this a sign of what's to come in the future?
I can't predict it per se because we do see a lot of stuff happening on the table. I mean, not only the Arab parties were against it, but also the opposition itself keeps fighting it. And it's funny because we are talking about a right-wing opposition opposing a right-wing bill. We can see it with the Haredi parties, for example. They were also given the option for reparations for the victims of the Meron disaster. but they decided to decline it due to the fact they don't want to support the government. And of course, we see it from the religious Zionist party. They're fighting against it because their whole main reason right now is try to dismantle this government. So there is a big issue on the table whether or not this will succeed. In addition, we cannot say 100% how will the coalition go with it, because we see fights on the left, fights on the right. We see that there's no straight line. I mean, if you look at the diversity, I mean, you see a New Hope, Yamina, Blue and White supporting it. And then again, you have people in Labour Party, in Meretz, in the Joint List, in Ram. I mean, you have all those parties itself that are fighting against it. So literally the question is, will it pass or not? It's a good question. The bill is coming forth next week and they will vote on it. But then again, the question is not whether or not Ram will support it now. It's more if Ram will abstain or will resist the law.
Mm-hmm. And we're also seeing some issues over settlements. What's happening there?
So we are talking about another settlement being evicted, which is funny because bringing someone who's currently the prime minister, who was a former head of the Yesha Council, and he, in his first act, already evicted settlements. This is very unprecedented before, and this is a big issue in the government. Of course, seeing the fact that Bennett himself has already evicted one and is talking about evicting the second settlement, specifically Eviatar, which is now also been told is scheduled for Sunday. It was supposed to even be later, but Sunday, with the fact that there's also a fast day, specifically on that day, also makes it a very controversial day to evict the settlement. And of course, we're seeing voices on both sides. I mean, we're seeing on the right, we see Nir Orbach from Bennett's party going to support the citizens, but unlike the reports that came out earlier today, he will not be transferring also his offices there. He's just coming to help with the support and to see how best to deal with the situation. And on the left, you see Mossi Raz from Meretz, who is fighting to support this bill and thus keeping the left-wing side of the government very predominant.
All right, well, a lot of challenges facing this government. Asaf, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you so much.
And in some good news today, Gilad Shalit, a former IDF soldier who was held captive by the terrorist Hamas organization in Gaza for 5 years, got married on Wednesday evening, 10 years after he was released in a prisoner exchange. Shalit married his longtime girlfriend Nitzan Shabbat at an event hall in central Israel. The wedding was attended only by family and close friends. And prior to the wedding, the two also held a traditional henna ceremony with pictures of the event going viral shortly after. Shalit, who is now 34 years old, became a national figure in 2006 when he was abducted by Hamas in a cross-border attack on Israel's border with the Gaza Strip. He was held for 5 years and 4 months, during which time he became a household name as Israelis rallied for his freedom. He was released in 2011 in a controversial prisoner exchange that included the release of over 1,000 Palestinian terrorists. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. So it looks like we're going to have a beautiful sunny weekend, but it's not summer without the heat. Tonight's lows are pretty warm in the central and southern areas at 22 and 25 degrees Celsius respectively, and temperatures a bit lower at 18 degrees in the north. And moving into Friday and Saturday, meteorologists calling for high in the 30s and even reaching 40 degrees in the south. And now before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel.
Are you learning to speak Hebrew while you're over there?
Well, I've learned a lot of words. I haven't learned enough to actually carry on a conversation or even to string anything but a perfunctory sentence together. But I'm actually learning a lot with Leo because he watches these baby TV kind of things, and it's all in Hebrew. And so I'm learning with him things like, cat is katul, horse is sus, cow is para. All right, so I'm learning, the Sesame Street, the Hebrew Sesame Street version.
It's a good way to do it.
Hebrew.
All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.25 shekels to the American dollar and 2.64 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Ladar Gavei Lazi. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.